Oh, hello. All right, thank you for coming to learn about Visual Studio and Xamarin. So I have options. I have a lot of content that I could talk about. So I need to hear from you a little bit, okay? I've been sitting in other sessions and it's been very quiet, like that. So I will call on you a lot and you can yell at me, you can ask questions, you can make fun of me, but just don't fall asleep, okay? Did everybody have their espresso before they came in? So first question for you, how many of you have built a Xamarin app? Okay, so a few. So I'm going to take it that the rest of you are here to learn what Xamarin is. Okay, we've got some what Xamarin is, a few of you. The gentleman walking up on the aisle there said yes, that was me. All right, so I will cover a little bit of what Xamarin is, but I'm going to then dive into some of the cool things you can do with Xamarin, and more importantly, what Xamarin has been doing and will be doing in the future, because we have a lot of grand plans for Xamarin. We are growing. Xamarin is not shrinking, it's not dying, it's not going away. Microsoft is not killing it. All of these kinds of things that people like to ask me from time to time. Microsoft is investing in it. If you go and you look at the Visual Studio 2019 roadmap for Windows and for Mac, you will see it full of Xamarin features. So we are investing a lot in Xamarin, and I'm excited for that. So first, let me introduce myself a little bit, and then I will jump over to some quick introduction of what Xamarin is. So I am David Ortenow. I am from German heritage. My family was from Germany. Any Germans in the room? No, none, not a single. Nein, nicht. They moved to Hungary and then they moved to America back around the turn of the 1900s. But I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. I am a program manager, senior program manager for mobile developer tools. So we focus primarily on Xamarin, and before I joined Microsoft, I was a Xamarin MVP. But it's important to note that we don't only do Xamarin. We actually also support Cordova and React Native and those sorts of things. We do not have any current focus on native script, but who knows? Could happen. You guys get super popular and we'll be there for you. Because our focus is really on developers. A little bit of background about me from a technology standpoint. I started out writing VB script with Access databases. Anybody VB script and Access? Come on. Yeah, Access. And then moved on to SQL Server. And then eventually .NET came out, so I converted myself to a VB.NET developer. Any VB.NET developers in the room? All right, we got a hand. But I quickly moved on to C#. Sorry. And mostly because all the samples were in C#. So I kept getting these MSDN magazines, and I'm like, I got to do the C# thing. But then I also spent about the majority of my career really doing interactive design using Flash and Flex. Anybody familiar with Flash and Flex from Adobe? Anybody proud to have worked with? I'm proud of it. I created some of the coolest crap you've ever seen. I did not build giant intros to websites. I built stuff like 3D globes that you could touch and spin. And it was a lot of fun. So I'm quite proud of that part of my life. And especially with Flutter becoming a thing, now I'm like, oh, it's the second coming of Flash. It's vector-based stuff. So I totally get that. All right, now I'm rambling. I'm just telling stories. Let's get moving. So what I love about Microsoft, and I joined Microsoft just under 2 years ago, is that this is the mission of Microsoft now. This is not the Microsoft that you may have known from the past. And this is a Microsoft that I'm very proud to be a part of. We believe in what people make possible, and our mission is to empower every person, that's every one of you, every organization on the planet to achieve more. So what I spend most of my time doing is going out and talking to you, talking to companies and people like you, and finding out, what are you building? What tools are you using? What could we possibly do better to help you? What are your chief frustrations? What are your major challenges? And how can we solve those things for you? How can we right the wrongs that we've done in the past and empower you so that you are able to be more efficient, more productive, that your boss gives you raises, that your customers pay you more money? That's really why I exist, and I love that because it's a very selfless thing. I don't have to sell you anything. If you're not aware, Xamarin's open source. To use Xamarin, you really don't have to buy a thing, and that's wonderful. And I like that because I don't like to sell. I like to advocate because I think it's a good product. Okay, so at that point, I'm going to jump way down here in my slides, and let's do a quick overview of what Xamarin is for those who are new to Xamarin. And I won't spend too long here. Bum, ba, da, bum. Slides. I have so many slides, you guys. Okay. So very quickly, here it comes. So Xamarin is all about native. And so when we talk about native, we're talking about native user interfaces. So in Xamarin Forms, for example, when you say you want a button, on iOS, you actually get a UI button. On Android, you get the native button, and the same thing on UWP. We also support WPF, Tizen for Samsung products, Linux by virtue of GDK, and there are experimental products also out there that will take you to the web, one of which is called UI. It's also about native API access. So if Apple or Google comes out with some new API to enable a new sensor for biometrics or something like that, we absolutely need to be there. And that's part of being native, that you can always access every feature of that phone. And then it also means native performance. And so this is certainly where products like Xamarin can start to take a hit. But when you look at Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android and you compare those directly against an Objective-C Swift app or a Java app, for example, or a Kotlin, for that matter, you can see strong comparisons in the performance of those things. So this is what we mean when we say that Xamarin is native. When you talk about a product being native, this defines what it is that we're talking about. These are the three key areas that we're looking at. So when it comes to architecting your mobile apps, traditionally you'll have a siloed approach where you have a team that understands iOS for Objective-C and Swift, and they're going to build everything in that silo. Nothing can get shared there from there to the Java application. And then your Android is written in Java or Kotlin now or Dart if you're using Flutter, right? And then Windows, of course, C#, whether it's UWP or WPF or WinForms as our fan. And any other WinForm fans in the house? Yeah? Fans of the drag and the drop? Yeah, super productive. So you, of course, have a lot of different products with which you can do a write once, run anywhere, and those will give you different levels of good user experience, bad user experience, weird user experience. But I will say this. When it comes to user experience and the quality, the success of the product, how many of you are professional software people, professional technology people, okay? Who's responsible for the quality of the product? We are, right? The technology choice that we make is our responsibility. The technology itself, if it's failing us, then we need to adapt to it, we need to learn it better, or we need to choose a different technology, right? But at the end of the day, creating a good app really does rest on your shoulders and on my shoulders. Before I joined Microsoft, I've been a software developer for going on 25 years now. I look like a kid, but I'm old. I've got a 20-year-old daughter. I'm like buying tattoos now for, like this is, right? So I'm older than I look. For 10 years, I had my own company doing software development for major telecom companies, cellular companies, food brands, major companies, okay? And I used a variety of technologies to deliver for them. So while I am advocating for C# and .NET and Xamarin because I believe that that puts you in the best position to deliver a really good product, I've used a variety of them with different measures of success. But at the end of the day, you own the beginning and the end of the quality and the user experience of your product. So I want to do my best to empower you to do the best you can. Make sense? Cool? All right. That was just my general admonition. I don't know why. That was free. You didn't have to pay for any of that. So what is Xamarin's unique approach? What Xamarin actually does is it creates bindings to the native SDKs. So every time Apple or Google comes out with something new, whether it's a support library or whether it's the core APIs for the product, we create bindings from C# to the native code so that you can then access the native APIs using C#. Okay? So we are not cross-compiling anything. We are directly calling into the native SDKs and executing it just like if you had written it in Objective-C, Swift, or Java, or Kotlin, or blah, 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 right? So that's the key distinction between Xamarin and other products, is that that's our strategy, okay? What that means, though, is that every time something new comes out, in order for you to use it, if it's in a native library or a native language, you need to have a binding made for it. We provide you with different techniques with which to do binding, but binding is fundamentally an interop strategy, right, that you can do yourself at any time. So the power is in your hands. But I'm not going to pretend that creating bindings is simple. Creating bindings is hard. Anybody created a binding before? Yeah? Was it easy? No, but did you feel like a total stud when you got out to work? No, you didn't feel good? You felt good? Yes, okay. Yeah, that was my American slang that he didn't understand. Sorry. I'll try to keep it English neutral. So from a user interface standpoint, the Xamarin Native approach, you can still use storyboards. You can use Android AXML or XML files for your layout. As a matter of fact, you can use Xcode to manage all of those layouts for iOS. You can use Android Studio to do all your layout, drag and drop designing on that side. We do provide you with our own designers for iOS and Android inside of Visual Studio, so you can use those. But it's up to you. You can use either. And on Xamarin Forms, what we actually do, as I described previously, when you want a button, we just have an abstract button. And then when it gets rendered, it uses what's called a platform renderer. That renderer news up a UI button on iOS or a new button on Android, etc. And you get the native element, okay? So Forms is not really necessarily doing any trickery, but what Forms is doing is unifying the APIs between those platforms. So if iOS and Android and UWP, if only one of them has a checkbox, for example, right? Android most recently added a checkbox. We don't actually have a checkbox right now in Xamarin Forms because it's not a common pattern across all of those mobile platforms. But that's not to preclude us from ever adding a checkbox. It's just that that's the methodology, that's the vision for what Xamarin Forms was created to do. So you do still get that native UI. Xamarin Forms provides you with pages and layouts and tons of controls, and you don't have to read all this, but it's all there. This is what I was describing in terms of when you ask for something in Forms, what is actually created for you is all native UI. And then we also bundle services, dependency services, messaging, navigation, themes, and then third-party frameworks are readily available to you as well. Okay? So with that, I'll call that the introduction to what Xamarin is and what Xamarin does. And from here, I'll go back to the beginning of the presentation, and let's look at some cool examples of what people are currently doing with Xamarin. And I'll walk you through some of the techniques, tips, and tricks of how they achieve these things. So how many of you have heard, let's see if this animation, okay, so the animation's running. So how many of you have heard of Gorilla Player and GrileKit? Okay, so a few of you. So what they are doing is they are creating a series of themes and templates and layouts that are gorgeous. They're beautiful like this, right? And they're showing you some advanced techniques of parallax scrolling and multi-step animations and things like that. And when you purchase GrileKit, you get all this stuff. And I'll show you an example of what Gorilla Player does later. But this is an example of, the kind of beautiful UIs that you can create easily with Xamarin Forms. Actually, look at that Play Movie button. You see how the Play Movie button actually dips behind the white space? Did anybody catch that? It was really cool. So this is all using straight Xamarin Forms stuff. It's using a little bit of additional custom libraries on the side to make things easier, but everything you're seeing here you can do out of the box with Xamarin Forms. So that's some pretty nice aesthetically pleasing stuff. Another example of some cool stuff, this is from Javier Suarez Ruiz in Spain, currently working for Plain Concepts. And so he's been taking examples like this and doing Xamarin Forms versions of it to show just how powerful and engaging Xamarin Forms UI can be. And so you can go to his WordPress website, which you can't read here at the bottom. I'll share all these so you can grab the links and go check this stuff out yourself. But go grab the XAML and look at his layouts and look at the animation and how he achieves these things, because it's really, really cool. On this side over here, that menu button that was animating and opening and closing, that's using Lottie, I believe, which is another example of some really cool animation that you can do. Oh, I didn't push it yet. Yeah, there you go. Isn't that sweet? How many of you would get a raise at work if you delivered something like that? Yeah? I mean, of course, you guys aren't in it for the money, right? You're in it for all really good reasons and the money, whatever. Lottie is another good example. This is from the Airbnb team, and there is a Nougat package for you to be able to use this in Xamarin and Xamarin Forms. And essentially, you can take animations that are pre-made, and you can bring them right into your applications, or you can make your own using Adobe After Effects and some other creative tools. And then you can bring them into your application. So you can create a beautiful start screen for your application or any kind of instructional stuff. Your imagination is the limit about what kind of cool things you can do with Lottie. And then Steven Thuissen from, I believe he's in the Netherlands, or he might be Belgian. I get that confused because I visited both places recently, and so I don't remember which country he was in. But these are some examples of Spotify. And so it's Spotify on iOS and well, actually, that's all iOS. Sorry. So this is the official app over here on these two. And then these two are the Xamarin Forms version. And so what he's basically saying is, look, you can create these UIs in Xamarin Forms, and it's actually not that hard. He's done this with Twitter, with Runkeeper, with Spotify, and I believe another app. So all of that code from him is available up on GitHub. Very good learning examples for you to go see how to create these kinds of UIs using simple Xamarin Forms XAML, styling code, even some CSS. So a little bit of inspiration for you. So what I want to do now is I want to spend some time going through the different things that you can do in a Xamarin Forms application to do this. When I first started working for Microsoft, I spoke to a company that had built a large fashion application. I can't tell you exactly who it is. That's why I say it's a fashion application. Very popular fashion brand that you would all know if I told you. And they did some really great animations and things like this. And I said, well, what were your major frustrations when you first started? And they said, when we were trying to customize like an entry field, we would get to the end of the properties that were on the entry field, and the property we needed wasn't there, and we were at a dead end. We didn't know what to do next. We didn't know what was available to us, right? So that's what I'm going to walk you through. When you get to what looks like a dead end, I'm going to show you that there's actually another road, that there's another path, and you have options. And really, the options don't end until you're all the way down at the native platform level. You can go all the way down to do exactly what you do in iOS and Android. And I'll show you the ways to get there. All right. So this is what I call the progressive enhancement experience, which probably is a familiar phrase. So you start with the forms element, and you basically exhaust all the different properties that you can update on that forms element, right? And then once you get done with that, you might start looking at platform specifics. A platform specific is when you, for example, you know that you should be able to do something on Android, but maybe it doesn't work on iOS. How do you make sure that you get that on Android? Or vice versa, how do you make sure you get something on iOS? So for example, a good example of the platform specific is when the notch came out. Anybody from, everybody's got the notch, right? Hold up your notch. Show me your notch. Yeah, we got notches. That's not an iOS notch though, is it? That's an Android notch. Android's copying the iOS, right? So the thing is you now need to accommodate this black thing that just invaded the space of your layout. And what are you going to do about that? So Apple introduced the safe area layout padding. So for Xamarin Forms, that was a uniquely iOS thing and still is a uniquely iOS thing. So you have a platform specific that allows you to say, when you're running on iOS, account for the safe area. And that way, you don't have to worry about the notch invading the space of your beautiful app design, and then your designer doesn't come over to your desk and yell at you. Then once you've exhausted those, you might look at a platform effect. So an effect is a way for you to more easily access additional properties that the native platform makes available to you that Xamarin Forms itself didn't supply at the Forms API level. And then once you get beyond there, you also have custom renderers. Now there's one that I'm leaving out right now, but we'll actually look at a bit later, and that's behaviors. Behaviors is something slightly different, but it allows you to tap into some custom functionality for the controls. So the first place you're going to start is you're going to be styling your application, right? So you access this with XAML styles. Anybody in here a XAML fan? You like your XAML? Okay. Now I'll give a chance to the other crowd. Anybody that hates XAML and wants it to die in a fire? We got one guy. It's that guy right there. Everybody look. It's that guy right there. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. Fifth row, second seat from the end. Just kidding. So actually, I'm a fan of both sides of the table. I love my XAML, but I like it to be very short and terse. And I'm just fine writing C# all day long and doing coded UI. So I'm a bit of a weird one, I guess, that way. I'm good with both directions. So you can style it like this. You can access your properties, set your resources, and all that sort of thing. And then when you're ready to apply that to your entry field, then you access the style field, and you can do things like this with an on platform. And you can say, hey, when you're on UWP, use this styling set, but when you're on everything else, the default, use the other styling set, right? And by the way, that new on platform syntax right there, one of my favorite features we've just recently released, saves so much XAML. And I'll show you how much XAML in a little bit. But you can also use CSS. So CSS, it's a subset, but it's a pretty strict subset. So we don't do a whole bunch of, hey, we're reinventing CSS. You know, I mentioned that I used to do Adobe Flash and Adobe Flex. With Adobe Flex, you could actually use a variation of CSS as well, but it kind of wasn't really CSS. And so you ended up with stuff, you'd try to copy it from the web and put it into your app, and it wouldn't work. With this, however, you go look at some Flexbox examples and you're like, hey, I'm going to use that with my Flex layout. It will actually work. There are a few properties here and there that won't, but for the most part, it's the same CSS. You'll also notice, for example, that second property there, XF-placeholder color. So when we have a property that's not a true CSS property, but it is something that Xamarin Forms knows about, we are now introducing this XF vendor prefix, which is a valid CSS strategy, right? You probably use this with your WebKit and all that sort of thing. And I may have actually left a front dash off of that. I was typing it in my hotel room last night. But we now have vendor prefixes for these sorts of things. And then once you want to apply it to your entry field, you use the class property, and you can still use the same on-platform syntax and all that sort of thing. So this will get you pretty far. This will get you to a nice place with your styling and getting your field to look the way you want it to. But let's take a look at some actual code, and I'll run some demos here. So I've got this demo. So for example, the example I'm going to take here is a picker, okay? So everybody know what a picker is? For those who are unfamiliar with the picker. I touched you. Come on. There we go. This is a picker, right? I'm going to choose a color. It pops up with a list. I can scroll around in here, pick my color, and that's the picker, right? So this is the basic picker, and of course I can style this in a standard fashion with those styles as I just showed you. But what's the next level up? If I want to go with a platform specific, for example, on iOS, we expose a platform specific here that is update mode when finished. So iOS treats picking differently than Android. And if you want to control when the property is actually changed, so for example, if you're scrolling through and you just stop scrolling and that changes the selected property, is that the property you want to immediately apply? Because if you have two-way binding happening, that may not be what you want to have happened. You may want to wait until you've closed the picker altogether and then let the binding fire. Okay? What if the person wants to cancel their choice? That sort of thing. So iOS treats that very differently, and so here we have an iOS picker update mode when finished. Android doesn't have that concept here, so you don't get that same option on Android, but you can do it on iOS. And you'll notice here, in order to get that iOS namespace, I just had to add the platform configuration iOS specific. The nice thing about that, that's a lot of stuff to remember and type, right? I hate that. Visual Studio on Windows actually will pre-fill that for you when you go type that out. So a lot of XAML editor enhancements have been made in Visual Studio over the past couple of versions that are enabling a lot of that sort of thing. So you don't have to remember, oh, how do I type that iOS namespace thing? And you start Googling and you end up on our documentation and all that sort of thing. All right, so going to the next level, so an effect. So in this particular case, I have imported a new namespace from the Forms Community Toolkit, which has actually been renamed to the Xamarin Community Toolkit. And I want to be able to change the color of the picker based on what I set here. So change color, picker effect, set the color to red. So if we look at how that translates over here, platform effect, my color is red, right? So needed to do that because Forms doesn't make that readily available. So I don't have to worry about hitting a dead end with what Forms made available. I can poke right through and create the effect. So how does an effect like that look? So if we go here to the next example, here I've got another picker and I've got another effect, but in this case, I'm going to use a binding because the effect that I got from the Forms Community Toolkit was just a simple setter. It wasn't a bindable property. But I want to be able to bind so that when I pick the color from the list, I actually get the color I chose. So let's go ahead and show that to you because it's cool. So I come down here and I pick my cadet blue. So now my color is cadet blue, right? And I pick my chocolate because who doesn't love chocolate? Although this isn't dark enough chocolate for me, really. It needs to be dark. Milk chocolate, right? She gets it. Right on. All right, so how does this work? So obviously I have binding here. We all mostly probably understand how binding works. It's not really something I'm covering today, so if you don't know what it is, Google it or Bing it or Safari it or whatever, I don't know. You know what to do. If the internet ever went down, we would all be out of jobs, right? We wouldn't know how to do anything. I wouldn't know how to fix my toilet either. Okay, so how does the effect work? So we have two parts to the effect. We've got the Xamarin Forms class. It's called the routing effect. And then we've got the platform specific, and that's code that lives in the iOS or the Android project. And that's going to do the actual work. So in this case, I have a couple of assembly tags here that allow Xamarin Forms to know that I am exposing new functionality into Xamarin Forms. So I've got a picker change color effect. I'm in the Android project here, and I'm going to now create a platform effect. It's got a couple of override methods here. It's got the onAttached. I could do work here in the onAttached, but what I'm actually wanting to do is to change the color when the property changes, right? So what I want to override instead is the onElement property changed, and I've got a common method here for update color in case I want to use it anywhere else. And then I'm going to grab the color off of the element. The element is the Xamarin Forms picker element, okay? So I'm able to access the forms property even though I'm actually in the Android project. And then I'm going to check and make sure it's not the same color. If it's the same color, I bail out. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and store that color. And then the actual Android widget, I don't know if you can see that that's what the type of edit text is. It's an Android widget edit text. So it's a native control, right? I need to then use native APIs to set the colors as I wish. So I call set text color, color to Android. The to Android is a nice little helper override so that I don't have to worry about converting colors between different color spaces. And then the same thing with my hint text. On iOS, I do something very similar. I'm also exposing these things through the assembly tags so that Xamarin Forms and the compiler know what to do. And then in my onElement change, I have my update color, but this time it's a UI text field. And I've got a couple of other properties that I need to access in order to make this color change happen. This is all native code. And the really cool thing that actually attracted me to Xamarin to begin with, because I was doing Objective-C, Swift, I was writing Java, in addition to all the other weird things that I was writing. And I was shipping apps using the native technologies. What appealed to me most is that I can now do this in C#. I could use Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android, and all the same APIs were available to me. Not only that, but when I Googled for suggestions, I was more than happy to find an Objective-C or a Swift example, because I knew that the property names, the method names, were all going to be almost identical to what Xamarin iOS provided, and I just needed to do a quick little translation in my head, and I was off and running. Nothing was prohibited to me. I was able to do everything I wanted to do. All right. So the final example in this progression to doing more and more with the control is the custom renderer. So let's look real quickly at what the custom renderer looks like. So as I mentioned, when you have a forms element, you have a platform renderer. Well, if the platform renderer doesn't do what you want it to do, you can completely replace that guy. You don't have to use it at all. The effect allows us to use the existing renderer but make modifications to it, right? But a custom renderer says, I'm going to override it, and I'm really going to get serious about going in there and changing things. So this looks like the same picker, but when I touch it, you can see it's a completely different UI. It's now doing more of a iOS-flavored design, right? Kind of like the slot machine thing. And also, this looks more like a material entry field, doesn't it? This is not actually a laser pointer, it's a tie, but you can see what I'm pointing at. So quite a few custom things that happened here, and if we look at our project, we've got the custom control. So I've got my own namespace. It's from my project. I've got the same properties that I typically would expect to have here. And I can add my own properties too. There's nothing to prohibit me, now that I'm doing a fully custom control, from adding other properties that I want to have. And then in the Android project, I'm going to export this picker as my Android picker renderer. Okay? So it's actually going to extend the Android picker renderer from Xamarin Forms, and I'm going to go in here and modify how it behaves. I've got a couple of override methods that I can choose from. The onElement changed, the onElement property changed, and then I can access the native control just like this, and I can do whatever additional customization work I want to do here. Nothing is prohibited from me. I have full access to everything I need to do. Cool? All right. You don't have to clap. But that was the moment right there. If you wanted to clap, that was kind of an okay moment. I know it wasn't amazing, but all right, there you go. I have, you know, I need encouragement from time to time. All right. Thank you so much for being so kind. So, not because we're at DevReach or anything, but there is another option for you when you want to customize your UI and you can't quite get what you want from Xamarin Forms, or maybe the effort is more than you have budget to invest. Because I know that you all have the skills to do the work, but maybe you've got a cheap customer, right, and they don't want to spend the money. So you can do this. Has anybody seen this? Right? So lots of really good controls in here. The scheduler control, this is one of my favorites. Oh, you want to take the picture? It's my good side? No? Oh, Bulgarians are so rude. No, but seriously, Telerik has some really great controls, the calendar control. A customer told me recently that he was doing work and he was upset that certain properties weren't available in Xamarin Forms, but when he went to go build his scheduler functionality in his medical app, he bought Telerik and he's using that product. And he said he was happy to spend the money because it saved him so much time and it does a really good job. Anybody here work on that particular feature? Anybody? Yeah? All right, take a bow. Stand up, take a bow. No? Oh, come on, that was your moment. Are you married? I could try to get you, set up with somebody in the room. No, you good? Oh, he's got a ring on. It's on the wrong hand. Is that how you do it here? Is it on that hand? All right. You didn't know it was a stand-up comedy act, did you? So if you haven't, highly recommend checking this out. So let's talk a little bit about some other tips and tricks for how you can achieve really good designs in your applications. And I think I have 15 minutes, right? Timekeeper, 15 minutes-ish? Yeah? All right. So if you are not aware of, you ought to be, XAML C. So we now, when you create a new project in Xamarin Forms, we create one that has XAML C enabled. That's XAML compilation. So what that's doing for you is it's both checking the syntax of your XAML at build time so that you don't have to wait until you're running on device or on the emulator to figure out if your XAML is good or not. But it's also doing quite a bit of performance improvement for you. And then if you combine that with compiled bindings, you actually get even better performance than you would with a straight coded UI unless you went through the extra effort of creating compiled bindings in C#. And the interesting thing is this is one situation in which the C# is actually more verbose than the XAML for doing compiled bindings. So quick example of compiled bindings, and actually our documentation has new documentation on compiled bindings that's better than this, but essentially you declare your data type on the enclosing template or layout or whatever. Anything that takes the data type, you can put it there, and then it will treat everything inside of it as the context for that type. And that way, XAML knows how to generate the appropriate typed bindings, and you get a huge performance boost. So check that out. Also, on Android, this is one of the platform specifics that I don't think a lot of people are aware exists. But Android lists have the notion of fast scrolling. And so they do some optimizations on the native side that you can benefit from. All you need to do from the Android Xamarin Forms perspective is to enable that using this platform specific. So fast scrolling enabled equals true. And then we also introduced fast renderers back in 2.5, I think. We're actually on 3.3 right now. Xamarin Forms 3.4.0 is right now today in QA. And if QA says it's all good to go, I think it will be our stable release momentarily. I think it's pretty close to being ready to go. So with fast renderers, what that means is for button and image and label, when you ask for a button right now, or previously without a fast renderer on Xamarin Forms, you will by default actually get two views that actually get added to the visual tree. You get the button renderer that wraps it, and then the app compat button, which is the actual button that Android provides. Because everybody's using app compat, right? If on Android you're not using app compat, please use app compat. That's the way to go. What we did with fast renderers was we refactored it so that we no longer needed to create two visual elements to add it to the tree. That second visual element, that button renderer, was super convenient for Xamarin Forms in the early days, but it's not something that helps with your performance at all, especially if you have a lot of buttons or images or labels. And I can tell you from looking at lots of apps that those are absolutely the three most common controls that people use in their applications over and over. So in order to use fast renderers, right before you init your Forms application in your app delegate or your main activity, just call this set flags. Don't be scared by the experimental. That should be going away very soon. This has actually been out in the wild being used by people for like a year now. So I'm working This is being recorded. I am working with the engineering team to figure out when the appropriate time is to get that removed, because I think it's standard for everybody. But the reason we don't want to remove it blindly is if we were perhaps breaking anybody else. Like if the team from Telerik had a dependency on a button, image, or label, and we suddenly changed the API for it, then I would be getting a nasty email from Stefan about what I did to them. All right, layout compression real quick, because I want to spend the rest of the time on new features. Layout compression allows you to essentially look at a layout and look at how complex it is and say to yourself, you know what, I don't really need all of that. I can just remove that piece up there. So you had that stack layout and that grid. They really aren't doing anything other than providing positioning. There's no background images, no background colors, that sort of thing. So you can use this compressed layout is headless, and we will do the magic math in the backside to say, okay, we'll go ahead and remove those. Your layout will look exactly the same, but we've now removed a whole layer, actually 2 layers of nesting from your application. And if you know anything about GPU performance, UI performance, flatter is better, okay? So you don't want to have nested layouts that you have to recurse up and back down again. A little visual example of what that does for you. If you look especially at the 4 buttons at the bottom and look at how much thinner these are on the right, your right, than they are on the left, that's what we were able to do. We went from 130 views to 111, and then when you factor in fast renderers, it actually cuts it down to 70. So that's nearly cutting it in half. So that will save your UI a lot and really help your performance. Quickly, we also have native forms, and I'm saying quickly for myself, not for you. Native forms allows you to take any Xamarin Forms and actually embed that page directly into a Xamarin iOS or Android app. And we've even gone so far as to prototype and show you how you can actually take Xamarin Forms, which is all C# and .NET, and bring it into an Objective-C or Swift or Java app, which is pretty awesome. We have an example out there that uses the Kickstarter application that's open source. So with this, if you take a look at our Smart Hotel 360 app, there are examples in the maintenance version of the app where we do this. Essentially, you new up the settings view in this example is a Xamarin Forms UI, and then you say, hey, create view controller, because on iOS, it's a UI view controller, right? That gives you back the native renderer because, as we all remember, it is all native to begin with. And then you can push it onto your native navigation stack, just as if you had created that UI view controller using storyboards and nibs and all that sort of thing. But this way, you can start sharing more UI. And really, with native forms, if it's not completely clear, there is really now no danger in deciding, should I start with Xamarin iOS and Android, or should I start with Xamarin Forms? It really doesn't matter, because now you can flip-flop them all you want to, mix and match them. You can go either direction. All right, so here's what we're hearing from you. And so here are the things that we're currently working on and the things that we're going to be releasing very soon to make your lives a little bit better. So I recently ran a survey, and anybody fill out a survey for me recently? Okay, got quite a few, definitely in the front row, maybe some back here. So if you ever get a survey from me, and if you're not following me on Twitter, please follow me on Twitter, because that's a really good place to find the surveys. But I send them out via email too, but we don't always get all the emails through Visual Studio. And you know, we protect your privacy, right? So if you don't want emails from us, we're not going to send you emails. But if you're on Twitter, you have to read what I say. So anyway, so I read absolutely every response, and I occasionally look to see who wrote it. But I do read every response, and I follow up with the people who provide their information to find out more about those things. Because like I said, that's why I exist, is to find out how I can help you. So the negative information is actually the most valuable to me. So these are some of the things that came out of the most recent survey. So even though 13% doesn't sound like a lot, in the grand scheme of we actually had a lot of people respond to this most recent survey. So I think it's pretty good, pretty representative of what people are dealing with. So they were talking about build times. Basically, these are the kinds of concerns, complaints. And the question they're responding to is what do you dislike the most about Xamarin Forms in particular? Slow build times, random errors. I have to build, clean, rebuild. Debugging is painful. I have a very powerful machine, but it's still painfully slow to launch. Those sorts of things. So what we're working on, if we compare to 15.8, so 15.8 is the current stable release of Visual Studio on Windows. 15.9 is, I think currently, maybe, I heard maybe a rumor that it's actually making its way around the world right now. So I think it's going stable imminently. But if that's not true, then I didn't say that, and you didn't hear it from me. So we took the Smart Hotel 360 app because it has tons of dependencies. It has like close to 100 Nougat packages and all these assemblies. It's a great candidate for testing build performance. So with a full build, it takes approximately 64 seconds, and I'm measuring primarily Android because if you're not aware, Android builds, Xamarin or not, takes longer, okay? It's not just a Xamarin thing because we're actually using the native tools to build and stuff. No, that says 50 minutes left, right? All right, so build takes 64 seconds, pack 11 seconds, and then deploy 18 seconds. That's a full build. So that's a total of 93 seconds that, you know, maybe you can go make an espresso during that time, right? And then you come back to your desk. But if you're drinking that much espresso, that's not healthy. And so we want to make sure that you're a healthy developer, and so we're going to try to make that faster. If we look at what we measure for incremental builds, we've got 11 seconds and then 11 seconds for packaging because packaging just takes what it takes. And then deployment 9 seconds for a total in 15.8 of 31 seconds. So we can do better. So here are some screen recordings, if this is actually playing. You can see the output at the bottom is actually playing. So that's 15.8 on the left, 15.9 on the right, Forms on the bottom, traditional Xamarin Android on the top. And we're counting from the time you pressed run to the time that it actually starts on your device. Okay? So in this case, for that particular application, that's not the Smart Hotel application. That's a blank app, right? So on 15.8, it started in 20 seconds, 16 seconds over here. Very similar for Xamarin Android on Forms. So we're saving, 20% there, 15% here, and we've got a lot more work to do. There's more work coming in Visual Studio 2019, and I am talking primarily about Windows, but all the same stuff applies to the Mac as well, because these are all MS Build level things, okay? So a lot of that great work happening. If you want to keep track of what we're doing in this space, we actually are completely transparent and reporting to you all of our numbers on the Android Wiki. And this is something that I'm very proud of across all of our Xamarin teams. With the open source, we take that very seriously. Tons of pull requests and openness and projects. It's all available on our GitHub. If you ever want to know what the Xamarin Forms team is working on, go look at our project boards because you'll see all the latest details there. All right, UI changes. Hey, live previewer never works for me. Anybody ever heard that? Yeah. I'm not able to see a preview of the design. XAML previewer doesn't really work. Lacks the hot reload. Having to compile in order to preview. So here's what we're doing in that space. We have a lot of work being invested now into really making the previewer itself a very robust, productive part of your workflow, both on Mac and Windows. So that work is going to be coming to you, I believe, in the later previews of Visual Studio 2019, which you probably don't even have the first preview of, but when they start previewing, you'll get to enjoy that. There are also these amazing tools like Gorilla Player, who I mentioned before. You remember this visual example here from UX Divers. You can use Gorilla Player to have everything running in your emulator or on your device. You can actually run on multiple devices at the same time, be changing your XAML. He's going to check out a change here, and you're going to be able to see him reference that change on his UI. You basically just hit save and your changes are updated, just like you would expect from a live reload, live sync, hot reload type experience, right? So that's the behaviors I was mentioning before. He's doing some binding to the scroll position, and that's how he's getting these different behaviors to react to the scroll of that scroll view. And of course, getting scroll data from a scrolling UI in Xamarin Forms is a pain. Yeah, you're nodding. So they actually have a little library in their toolkit that gets that scroll information to you, which is a very nice feature. In addition to that, we've also got live XAML here at the bottom. Is a third-party product from a gentleman in Estonia. It does cost a few bucks, but it works really, really well. Gorilla Player is free. And then I also wanted to point out to you a new open source sample for doing this kind of live UI iteration called Zamelator. Not my favorite name in the world, but it does exist. This will actually do CSS, XAML, and C# code behind replacement. It is very early days for it. It's a little buggy, but very, very promising in what it can do. Cool? So I think I'm actually out of time, so I probably need to stop there. But we have a lot of really cool UI things cooking for Xamarin Forms in terms of shell and creating UIs that look the same everywhere, material design, as well as performance. So I hope you'll keep an eye out on what we're doing on GitHub. All of my presentations and decks are online. I'll make sure that this deck is online, including any of the slides I didn't get to. So be sure to check that out. And if you have any questions, if you have any feedback, if you want to come yell at me, I am around, and I'm actually much nicer than I look. I would love to hear from you. I would love to see examples of what you've been building, what you want to build, because like I said, all that helps me do a better job providing tools and software for you. And you know, I'm not just a product owner. I've been doing software myself for 25 years because I'm old. So thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it.